good idea.
So I definitely don't have anything to add there. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen so that we can get started. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for today. It's always so much fun to get to interact with the different chapters, across the globe. So I always look forward to these types of meetings. I think that is one of the positive things that I can say in regards to the pandemic is the fact that it probably opened up a lot more of these types of opportunities.
Pretty much on a daily and weekly basis of.
Let's see here. All right. I need to get rid of that little message there. Don't know where that's coming from. Let me adjust my screen. Sorry about that, everybody. All right. So again, welcome everybody and thank you for joining. This is our presentation. Can everyone see my screen now? If I could just get one or two people to say that they can see it. I just want to make sure that.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thanks. All right. So we're going to talk about the BA role in Agile. I think this is a really engaging topic. There's still a lot of, interesting perspectives around it. So I love talking about it, and it just always leads to great engagement. So I'm always happy to present it. So for tonight, we're going to talk about some Agile Basics, Agile Frameworks, and team structures. I know many of you might actually be in Agile environments already, so I don't want to spend too much time on it. I just want to go over some fundamentals for those of us who might not be as familiar with some of these fundamentals. And then we'll move on to talking about the business analyst placement in Agile environments, how to define your role in business or Agile analysis, and then some key Agile BA responsibilities and Agile requirements versus typical traditional waterfall requirements. Okay. All right, so the first thing I want to mention is that Agile is not a methodology. That's a very common misnomer. I have even said that myself until I went through the certification process and I learned that there's a difference between frameworks and methodologies. Whereas a methodology is really something that is sequential, step by step, in order to really achieve a particular goal, whereas a framework is something that kind of guides you along. It's more like a reference. Here are the possibilities, and you can kind of put it together in the best context, right? So things like Waterfall and Agile are actually frameworks, whereas things like Prince and Six Sigma, those are a little more stringent. So those would be more like methodologies. Okay, and some of the main mindsets of Agile business analysis is to, just Agile in general, is to deliver value rapidly, to collaborate, to iterate to learn, avoid waste, consider context and adapt to realities, reflect back on feedback and adapt, and then produce the highest quality product. All right, and so some of you might be familiar with this. This is called the Agile Manifesto. If you have not seen it or are familiar with it, you can just go to, I think it's just the agilemanifesto.com. And just kind of, this is like the start of Agile. And it basically, started back with some, development thought leaders who determined that they wanted to do things a better way. And so they created this. And basically what it does is it emphasizes on the items here on the left, and it basically favors these items here on the left, but recognizing the importance of the items on the right. So it basically states that, they prefer individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over a contract negotiation, and responding to change over following a plan, right? So this is probably the biggest advantage of Agile frameworks is because, we're, with traditional project management, we were so bound to that project plan where, any change had to go through this whole, draconian process. So we're a little bit free of that when we're dealing with Agile. And so this is just a quick visual of a comparison of traditional waterfall project management or SDL versus the Agile framework, right? So we know with Waterfall, we have our different phases here, right? Each chevron is a phase. So we've got analyze, plan, design, build, test, and deploy. Whereas in Agile, we still have all of those same activities, but it happens iteratively and it happens within a certain iteration or sprint for those of you who are in Scrum, right? All of these things happens, analyze, plan, design, build, test, and deploy all happens within one sprint in a small chunk of functionality, right? Or value to be delivered, okay? All right. And so another reason why there might be some confusion around what Agile is and how to execute it is because there's so many ways for us to do it. Here are just a couple of different ways that many organizations have gone about implementing Agile. It's very rare that you see an organization just jump into Agile. Most organizations do a hybrid approach first and then, do a little bit more and more and more. So here you might see where, there is, maybe some Agile, maybe some Agile rollout in terms of how we are doing planning or things like that, but you might do a more predictive rollout, right? So you might need more documentation in terms of actually doing implementation. Or you could have a mostly Agile project where there's a small piece that is very stringent and has like strict dates. So for example, if you are an Agile organization, but you have a vendor who is not necessarily Agile, they still have those contracts and they still have those dates. So this is the stuff that we would be probably doing in that little predictive box there. And then on another end, you might have a fully predictive approach where we know most of what we're doing, but there's still a component of the project that we're still unsure of or we're still discovering. So we might cover that component of the project in an Agile fashion. Okay. All right. And this is another it's not important, but it is. This is basically just the several different sub-frameworks that fall underneath the Agile umbrella. So like I mentioned earlier, not only is Agile a mindset, it's also a framework, but within that framework, there's all of these sub-frameworks that kind of like have their own little name brand, right? So most of us know about Scrum. I think over 60% of Agile organizations practice Scrum. And then we have things like extreme programming or Kanban or, FDD. And so this is why there's a lot of confusion because most people will say, well, in my last organization, we did Agile this way, but now here we're doing Agile another way. And it might not be that one organization is doing it right or wrong. It could be that one organization was doing one framework and this new organization is doing a new framework, right? So if you left a Kanban organization and went over to a scale or a safe environment, things might look a little bit different, right? So it's just important to understand that there are these different sub frameworks underneath the Agile umbrella. And it's also good to understand them, especially if you're an organizational leader, to understand some of the benefits and key characteristics of each of these frameworks so that you can basically choose or select the option that works best for your organizations or the goals that you want to achieve. All right, so this is really just a quick image of just the typical Agile team structure here. As you can see, you've got, you always hear about the servant leader or the Agile leader, the product owner, and then the development team, right? Outside of that, you might have some subject matter experts. business owners, and maybe some additional stakeholders, right? And a servant leader, that could be a scrum master, a team leader, or an agile coach. Whereas the product owner could be a customer representative, it could be a formal product owner, it could be the business analyst acting as the product owner, right? And then we have our development team. And that usually consists of developers, testers, and the business analyst, or whatever other specialized role. If there's a data analyst, they might be in there as well. So these red arrows here, these are the more common placements of an agile business analyst. And these are this is what I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about tonight. All right. So another shift that we have to consider when we are transitioning to Agile or moving into Agile is that there's going to be much more of a continuous analysis, right, and reanalysis. You will typically do elicitation per iterations, where you're really shifting from having a elicitation phase versus continuously eliciting information or gathering requirements for the project as new information comes along, okay? Then a flexible scope, right? So this will be now based on new or changing priorities or new information, whereas before it was almost like once we do the project charter or the business case and the project plan, that's pretty much our scope. But Agile leaves a lot of room for change, right? This is why it's called a change-driven approach or an adaptive approach, right? The scope is, there is some scoping done, but there is a lot of room for new information and new requirements, because a lot of the times you would choose an agile project or an agile approach when you're still discovering things and when requirements are maybe unclear or unstable. And then we have the timing of requirements, right? So, I'm sorry, I skipped a bullet. So less formal documentation, right? This is another more common characteristic, right? So we move a little bit away from the formal template documentation, 100-page requirement specification, and we're moving now into documenting in, software management platforms such as Jira or TFS. Now, we are still documenting, but it just looks a little bit different, right? It's not as formal. And then the timing is more so as needed. So the timing of documentation is as needed. We don't just say, okay, we're going to complete or create these documents. We will create documents as they are required and on a just-in-time basis, right? Really just before they're needed, because we don't want to spend too much time creating documents, because we're anticipating new and changing information as we come along, right? And then also an expanded and shared responsibilities, right? So this is what we call the T-shaped environment. And this is really where, a specialist will have a specialization, a deep specialization in one area. So for us, that would be a deep specialization or competency in business analysis, but we have a broad, high-level understanding of other roles. So we might dabble in testing or do a little bit of light coding, or maybe, some more data-oriented roles or responsibilities. All right, so one thing I do want to state is that in Agile, the BA title may be marginalized. However, the BA skill set is emphasized. And so basically what that means is that if you are on an Agile team where the BA role isn't necessarily called out the way the product owner or the Scrum Master or Agile leader is, our competencies and capabilities are expanding, actually, because now we're doing more things. Typically when we're in the cross-functional environment, we're learning about testing, we're learning about a little bit about development and coding, right? And also we're doing business analysis work more often, right? So we don't just have our little box or our little phase. We're basically fully active throughout the entire implementation process and development process. So where does the BA fit in Agile projects? Let's talk about that. Again, typically you will be a product owner, and this might be in some organizations, the BA might serve as the PO, so the business analyst might fully transition into a product owner. There's still a little bit of conflicting opinions about this option, right, and its effectiveness. And then we also have the product owner proxy, where the business analyst might more so collaborate with the product owner or fill in for the product owner when they're not available. And this is usually more when the product owner is new to their role and the BA might have to support them. And then we have the Agile business analyst, which might typically be the most common when you're in that transition phase, or if you're in an Agile framework that doesn't really focus a lot on roles, right? And then we have the dev team member. So this is usually what is I guess, my preferred approach, where you are an active cross-functional team member, where you're kind of we're broadening your broadening your skill sets and broadening your responsibilities. It says, I have a comment here that says associate product manager. Yeah, so the product manager, that also depends on the organization as well. So usually a product manager is more so on.
Like it's 6 or something, just in case I'm trying to end like fast too.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that comment. Can you repeat that? Was that a comment for me? No? Okay. So I'm going to assume that that wasn't for me. So the associate product manager, that typically would fall under the product ownership role. So some organizations might have a product manager, and some organizations might have a product owner. Some might have both. So it really depends on how your organization is operating. Sometimes they work together. Typically the product manager is more of a higher level role. So they might actually own the product, whereas the product owner might be more of the customer representative. So it really depends on how your organization operates and the other roles that they have within that particular organization. All right, so let's look at each of these scenarios and talk about some pros and cons of each. So the business analyst acting as a product owner. So as you can see in the Venn diagram here, many of you may have seen this online. There are a lot of overlapping roles, right? And so some of the pros of the business analyst acting as or transitioning to a product owner is that, the BA does have a lot of the needed skills for the product owner role, especially with the analysis piece. So oftentimes the BA is a natural transition to the product owner role. And it typically works well when the BA is fully transitioned to the product owner, instead of doing like a hybrid role. And so some of the considerations is that the business analyst might not have the adequate subject matter expertise needed yet in order to determine the business needs. So a lot of the times product owners are selected because they have deep knowledge in a specific domain or specific department. And typically us business analysts, we work with so many departments that we have more of a, high level understanding of these departments. But there are cases where a business analyst might be siloed and they work for one particular or maybe a couple of continuous departments to where they can build that expertise up. So if that is the case, then it might not be too much of a learning curve there. Also, the business analyst may not be comfortable making project decisions, right? Because that's a shift for us. Typically, the business analysts, we are not decision makers. We typically will present information and make recommendations to the decision maker, but it's usually the product owner that will make that actual decision. So shifting to that role will be a little bit of us stepping out of our comfort zone. And so, like I mentioned earlier, if you're trying to do a business analyst slash hybrid role, it can be ineffective if, I'm not going to say it's always ineffective, but it can be if there's not clear delineation between, why you need to have a hybrid role or when you'll be acting as the BA versus when you'll be acting as the product owner. I think what will be most important is to determine your level of authority in terms of your ownership of the product and your ability to make decisions. And so now let's look at the BA acting as a product owner proxy. So this is more common when the PO is not, the product owner is not necessarily fully dedicated to a particular project, right? So when we see product owners who are kind of juggling different projects or different priorities, right? Sometimes the business analyst can help them and fill in when the PO is not available, right? And also, if the product owner is newer to their role, the business analyst can support the product owner in weak areas, right? So things like, really defining a business need or really articulating requirements or defining requirements, right? In the form of user stories or acceptance criteria. These are things that the BA would be able to offer a lot of value and a lot of help. So some of the considerations there is that, again, the business analyst may not be comfortable making decisions in the absence of the product owner. And it also can add an additional layer of complexity around authority, right? So if you're kind of a blended BA slash product owner, does it mean that you have authority to make decisions or do you not? Or, do we still need to defer to the product owner? So, it can create a little bit of conflict because the product owner could potentially be held responsible for a decision or an action that the BA made on their behalf, right? So I think those types of things just need to be clearly defined up front so that everyone is clear and comfortable on their role. And again, it could be some issues around prioritizations if it's an urgent prioritization need, and then the BA makes a prioritization decision, and then the product owner comes with a different perspective, then, that can create some conflict as well. Then the BA acting as an Agile business analyst. So again, this is most often used in frameworks such as, Kanban, where there's not as much of an emphasis on role changes, right? It's also more common in more hybrid environments. And so basically here, the BA will do many of the traditional BA roles during the PMO process. So for example, if the organization has more predictive PMO activities, the BA would probably be doing more traditional BA work. And then once we transition into the development, where maybe the team starts doing sprints, then we might jump, switch a little bit into being more, switch our activities up to acting more in iterations and things like that. So again, that's something that the leadership really needs to determine. But some of the pros here is that, it can help facilitate that transition into Agile. The business analyst can learn Agile concepts in smaller chunks until, they're fully competent with Agile practices. And it does tend to be less disruptive than full Agile transition at, one time. So some of the considerations there is that, a framework integration can be challenging, right? When you're trying to mix predictive versus, adaptive, or Agile versus Waterfall. The development team might be tempted to leave the BA out of certain Agile ceremonies if they're not comfortable yet working with that BA role. So, the business analyst will really need to be intentional about being invited to those agile ceremonies, so that, you can basically be fully engulfed into, the agile practices. And then also, documentation must be fully, coordinated, right? So if you're doing a transition between traditional and agile, how much documentation are you going to need at what point? And then when can does that traditional documentation need to be translated into user stories, right? So how is all of this going to work? These are things that definitely need to be discussed. All right. All right, so now let's talk about the business analyst acting as a dev team member. Um, some organizations might call this a, um, you know, build team, dev team, agile team. There's a few different things that, it could be called. So um, let's just stick with dev team member for the sake of the discussion. But some of the pros there is that, um, you know, some of the pros there is that, the BA role and skill set does expand, right? And, you can really increase team task coverage. So if everybody is a little more cross-functional, you can, you can really make the team more efficient. Also, the team can be a little more empowered if they're not, in their, defined box. All right. And so some of the considerations there is that this really only works well in cross-functional or T-shaped environments, which means that each team member must be willing to train other team members on their area of expertise. So this does require some time. This does require some time for knowledge transfer. And also the roles do need to be clearly understood in advance. All right, so how to define and understand your role in Agile. Looks like I have a question here. So just a quick side note, someone's asking about the certification of an Agile BA. Yes, in most cases, BAs would be typically, receive their CBAT first and then transition over to Agile. And that's typically my recommendation because the core business analyst certifications are more fundamental. They give you the core business analyst activities, whereas the Agile certifications are more about how to exercise those activities in Agile. But I think if you're really more trying to understand more about business analysis in general, you would want to go with that core certification first and then do the AAC. But that was just a quick side note. So how to define and understand your role in Agile? How do we do that? So typically what's a good practice is for the team to use team charters as well as retrospectives. So a team charter is really not to be confused with a project charter. A team charter is really a document developed during team formation that really establishes the team values, agreements, operating guidelines, and just really understanding how the team will work together. So it really should happen up top so that we can understand, the project framework, the business analyst placement, the BA responsibilities, the business analyst deliverables, and what's out of scope for the BA role, right? And this isn't all we would talk about from the project charter. It would be more holistic, but from our BA perspective, these are some of the things that we're going to want to ensure that we get out of the charter. I'm going to try to speed up here because I see we only got a few more minutes. And also the retrospectives, right? Many Agile teams have retrospectives at the end of a sprint. And so if you're not familiar with the retrospective, it's really just like a lesson learned typically in more traditional Agile environments, the lessons learned happens at the end of a project, whereas the retrospective happens at the end of every iteration. But essentially the concept is the same. You're really just looking for what went well, what didn't go well, and what we, can improve on or try in the future, right? And so in retrospectives, when we're trying to define our role in Agile environments, we really want to be intentional about understanding how, effective is the BA placement, whether or not the deliverables that we completed were effective. Do we need to make any adjustments to the current BA responsibilities? Or should we make any adjustments to the timing of requirements and how we are, transferring knowledge with other team members on the team? And what are some common Agile BA responsibilities? There's a slew of them. So some very common ones are the ones that are in bold here that I'm going to talk about is refining the product vision. A lot of times, you can, a lot of times in traditional project management, you will have either a business case or a project charter, which kind of has the vision in it. But in Agile environments with reduced documentation, you'll more likely have a product vision or even a project roadmap. But, helping to refine that product vision, creating and refining user stories is a common one. Splitting and decomposing those user stories to get them, at the right size or the appropriate level of detail, right? Refining that acceptance criteria. Also performing exploratory and functional spikes. So for those of you who don't know what spikes are, typically if a story or component within the backlog, if there's not enough information to size it, you will want to do a spike to do additional research. So a lot of the times the BA would be a good resource for that as well, while the developers, continue on to do their work. And then also facilitating feedback loops, right? So understanding how we're going to get feedback from stakeholders or, subject matter experts, and then channeling that to the build team. A BA is an excellent resource for that because that's kind of what we do anyway in traditional project management. And then assisting in developing the product roadmap. Sometimes if you're a more senior BA and you've been involved in more strategic activities of the organization, you might be able to work with the product owner to help them, articulate and define the product roadmap and consider things from an external or a, market perspective within our particular domain or industry. Also eliciting user stories from stakeholders beyond the product owner, right? So a lot of the times, Agile environments think that user stories can only come from the product owner, when in fact they can still come from stakeholders outside of the product owner, right? It's just that oftentimes that product owner is like the representative of that. So, sometimes if the product owner isn't necessarily available, we still need to elicit requirements or user stories from other stakeholders. And also resolving any analysis related roadblocks, right? So, when we have like refinement meetings and there's not enough information for, developers to really estimate a story, or, if there's still a lot of different questions in regards to what the expectation is, right? These are things that the Agile BA can really, help or serve value. And of course, like I said, there's others here, but I don't want to spend too much time on those. So we'll move on. Now, transitioning from Waterfall versus Agile in terms of requirements tends to be a little more informal. So the left-hand side here, these are this is the Agile side, right? Versus the Waterfall side. So Agile requirements tend to be informal versus formal. You tend to do more refining versus specifying. You tend to have more discussion versus describing. Requirements, again, is just in time versus in phases. You prioritize more versus planning, and then you collaborate more versus doing independent activities. So with the informal, right? We know that, documentation is much less in Agile, but I want to emphasize that that does not mean that there are not standards in Agile, right? There is still a standard of a good user story, right? It's not just you come up with something that has the who, what, and why, right? There's certain components, you need to have a good set of acceptance criteria to help us understand when that, the boundaries of that user story is complete. And the acceptance will allow us to test that user story as well, right, from a development standpoint. And so, again, while, traditional requirements, you typically have more um, templates from the organization and things like that, or there might be, certain notations that you might have to use. A lot of that might be included as supplemental information for a user story. So for example, I might have a user story, but I might still have some of that more traditional diagramming, or even a use case attached to that user story to provide additional information if it's needed. And so in Agile, you typically do more refining versus specifying. So we know in traditional project management or Waterfall, we are specifying statements, right? We need to have stated requirements that are specified on paper. And this specification is really describing what we're doing. Whereas with user stories, a product owner might start off with a user story and the business analyst might refine that, right? To make sure that we're meeting, user story quality standards, that we're having the, acceptance criteria, that, we're splitting the story, making sure that it's sized appropriately, right? So we're doing a lot more refining to what the product owner has presented if they initiated the user story, versus actually specifying the information ourselves. And so then that moves us on to discussing versus describing, right? So user stories in themselves are tools to encourage discussion, right? We need to have discussions to outline that acceptance criteria, understand that acceptance criteria, right? So a user story in itself doesn't give us adequate requirement information. We need to have those discussions to outline that acceptance criteria, okay? Whereas, in Waterfall, we are describing exactly what we want that, or how, exactly what we want out of that need. And then the just-in-time versus the phase. So in phases, again, like I mentioned, you can't start something until the previous phase is completed. Whereas in Agile, we don't really plan that far ahead that, oh, we're going to do this, that, or whatever. We do documentation or requirements as that information is needed. So once, stories are approaching, the next iteration, that's where we start defining them more or refining them. Or if there's additional information we need to estimate it accurately, at that point, that's when we'll get that information just in time. And then again, we'll be doing more prioritizing versus planning, right? So Waterfall or traditional project management tends to, it's a requirements document, and what's anticipated is that all of the requirements are going to be developed at one point or another. Whereas in Agile, we have that mindset of we're trying to maximize outcomes, and minimize outputs. So we're trying to reduce what we're delivering, but provide the most amount of value. So we're always trying to cut something off the list. So for those of you who might get agitated with the developers that are always trying to get rid of requirements, that's a common part of Agile, is to deliver as little as possible while also delivering the most value. We don't want to deliver anything that we don't absolutely have to. And then collaborative versus independent exercises. So again, Agile is much more collaborative than business analysis. I'm sorry, than traditional business analysis and project management. So you'll likely be collaborating with other team members on many of the activities that have been traditionally the business analyst role, right? Like, for example, developing a requirements document, maybe some, process models have been traditionally the sole responsibility of the business analyst, whereas, like I touched on earlier, the product owner might initiate the user story, and then the BA might refine it, and then the BA and the product owner might collaborate and have more discussions on what the acceptance criteria looks like, and we might even bring in some other stakeholders for that, right? And then we're going to present that to the developer, who's going to estimate that, right, or size that, right? So it's really much more collaborative around requirements than what we're used to in terms of how we do business analysis. So that is all I have for you all today. Just a quick note. If any of you are interested in any of your IIBA certifications, you can definitely check out my website at thebadoc.com. We have live resources, on-demand resources, a monthly membership resource, tons of different, training resources and options. So just check those out if you're interested. I'd be happy to communicate with you guys on any of these platforms. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Pinterest, YouTube, LinkedIn, and as well as my website. And if you have any questions for me, you can always email me at at info@thebadoc.com. So I think at this point, we're going to open up the floor for Q&A. I'm not sure who's going to take the lead on facilitating the Q&A questions, but at this point, I will turn it back over to our hosts.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Michael. I really appreciate your presentation. I'm looking in the chat to see if we have any questions. I see any coming through. So please, if we have any questions, you could put that in there right now. I'll be glad to read that out. Or you could go off mute and ask the question.
Okay, let's see.
Thank you very much, Angela.
Oh, you're very welcome. I'm glad this was informative. I see Andrea saying, what's the most misunderstood part of your role in Agile? I think for me, it was what I like, the ceremonies that, the BA should be a part of. I think, the traditional ceremonies, right? Like the daily stand-ups or the estimating meetings, right? So I think for me, I wanted to come to everything. So a lot of developers were like, well, why does the BA really need to be at an estimating, meeting? We're the ones doing the work, so we're going to be the ones estimating. But, what we found out was that, during estimation, still might be some underlying questions, right? And if the product owner is not there, the BA might be able to answer that question because they typically have a little bit more of a broader perspective than the developer might have, right? So we found it to be very effective to have the BAs at different ceremonies like that. So also, I think the most understood part comes if there is a product owner. I think it becomes, okay, well, if we have a product owner, then what is the BA really here for, right? Do we really need a BA? But this kind of goes into the level of expertise the product owner has in their role, because if you do have a fully efficient or effective product owner, there's still a lot of product owner responsibilities, and it's a lot for one person to handle. So even if the product owner is fully capable of their role, there still might be certain things that the BA and the product owner can collaborate on to just make the process more effective and to get more things done quicker, right? So I just think it's more about, you know, what should the BA do when there's a product owner, and also what type of agile ceremony should that BA attend? That's a very good question. Okay, how about, I guess I can pose a question to the group as far as, I guess, how many of the attendees on the phone are in fully agile environments versus more hybrid environments? Or you might be in a environment that's a little bit more waterfall and they're kind of interested in transitioning to agile.
Zoom has sorry to interrupt. Zoom has a reaction where you could raise your hand. So please, you could use that to indicate a response to the question. And Dr. Michael will just look at everyone who's raising their hands.
Okay, Angela's making a transition to Agile. Very good. Yeah. Good. You know, like I said, I think if you are making a transition to Agile, it's just really good to have an understanding of the overall Agile role. And just knowing that you might be empowered to do more than what you're doing now, right? So it might be really good to have conversations with the Agile leader to determine, you know, what type of team the Agile team is going to have. Is it going to be a cross-functional team, or maybe not so much, right? But regardless of what it is, like I said, I think just ensuring, if you're ever in a position to where you feel like you don't know what your role is or that you're not adding enough value, it might be a good thing to step back and work with either your leader or the Agile team leader and define a team charter for the organization, so that you know, you can really get some clarity around, you know, what you should be doing and how you can add the most value to the team, because a business analyst can definitely add value to agile environments for sure. Okay, we got a couple.
Thank you, Dr. Michael. I'll throw one question. Okay, I'll take the question. This is from Steven. He's trying to get into the BA role as a fresh graduate, university graduate. What advice do you have for him regarding Agile and his intended step?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for me, I would say learn about the business analyst role first. So, you know, things like the ECBA might be a good stepping stone for you, because I'll tell you like this, the business analyst role is typically a role that emphasizes experience. So most organizations they're going to want to have a BA with some experience, unless they're hiring for an entry level or junior BA. So I would say maybe limit your scope to more junior or entry level BA roles. But what I will say is that until you're able to gain that formal experience, the ECBA can help tip the scales in your favor a little bit, because at least they'll know that you have the fundamentals of what a business analyst is, right? And then I would get into the agile certifications, or at least learning more about agile practices, because if your focus is really just trying to get at a BA role, you really just want to get the BA competencies that you can apply to any role, regardless of whether or not they're agile. You know, if you focus too much on agile, that can kind of limit your scope. So I say learn about business analysis as a whole, and then learn more about agile, because a lot of organizations do want that agile expertise as a competitive advantage, but you still want to have that core business analysis capabilities.
Thank you, Dr. Michael. There's Yeah, so you want to read out the question? Yeah. Would you say that becoming a product owner is a natural progression from the BA role? And are these other steps one should take to achieve that? And
Yes.
then I'll combine the next question. Is having Agile Scrum certification A+?
Okay, so I would say yes. So I think the product owner role is a natural transition for a BA who is in a agile environment. And that does become, because, you know, the product owner role itself does take on a lot of the traditional BA responsibilities. So you're really almost halfway there. So yes, I would say that it is a natural, you know, a natural stepping stone for the BA. So some of the steps I would say to achieve that is to probably get some type of product owner training or product owner certification. You know, there is the professional product owner certification, as well as IIBAs now having a product owner analysis certification that's soon to come. So that's that, but also you want to become more of a subject matter expertise. So if you are a product owner, that means you're going to either have ownership of some department or some type of particular product. So depending on how your organization operates, so let's just say, for instance, if your organization puts you in charge of their product owners in terms of like actual products or systems or applications, then you want to learn as much about that product or that system as you can, because at that point, you're going to be able to know enough to be able to make decisions on it. And so is having a Agile Scrum certification A+? I would say it's only a plus if you are in an Agile environment, right? So a lot of times I tell people to wait until you are in an organization to get a certification that's so specific, like Scrum and SAFe. Those are very specific methodologies, right? That's why I have a preference for the AAC, because the AAC from IIBA is general. Any BA at any Agile organization, these are the principles you need to do. This is where you fit in. It doesn't matter if you're Scrum, you know, XP, SAFe, or whatever. These are the principles you need to do. So I feel like the AAC is a little more broad, but I do think if you are in a Scrum organization, or even, you know, a Scrum environment, that a Scrum certification would be a plus for sure. And it does give you a high level understanding of, Scrum. But the thing is, as long as you understand that you are learning about a particular framework and not Agile overall, you know what I'm saying, then at that point you should be fine. Can a BA also be a Scrum Master? I don't know that that's the best practice. That a BA would be a Scrum Master and a BA, because the Scrum Master is typically more hands-off and is more about making sure that the team is, practicing Agile practices, right? They do have more of a, they resolve some roadblocks, which does overlap with, the BA role. But a lot of what the Scrum Master does is, a lot of the times, they deal with issues outside of the project, right? So they deal a lot with management or external stakeholders, or things that serve as, potential impediments to the team. So I'm not going to say it's impossible, but it can be kind of a conflict, because, it's just that you have two separate focuses, and one person with two separate focuses, you tend to be not as effective. So I wouldn't recommend it, but I'm not going to say it's not possible. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Michael. And to round up, I'll ask one question, or maybe get your advice on this. As much as Agile asks us to focus on the working software versus comprehensive documentation, for progression, would you say it's helpful to find the balance in that documentation, especially when you deal with, a lot of processes and it's multi-department involved in a solution, and maybe, you transition BA roles within a project, and so you need to be able to hand over information without it being just word of mouth. So should we think about that balance in the documentation?
Absolutely. That balance, understanding that balance is so important in Agile. And that's why I think, training is so important, and not to be biased because I'm a trainer, but understanding things, because really when you think about it, a user story with detailed acceptance criteria is pretty much, user stories are equivalent to stakeholder requirements or customer requirements, whereas the acceptance criteria is more like the functional requirements, right? So it's really, you're documenting the same type of information, just in a different way. So now, instead of doing all of this on Word, I'm just doing it directly in Agile, right? So, or directly in Jira or whatever the platform is that we're doing. And there might be different people doing it, but all of the information is still really there. And so it's more about understanding how the same information is used in a different way, because that's really all Agile is. A lot of the stuff, you're still doing the same things, just at a different timing. Maybe you're doing it in shorter increments, right? But to me, I found that I'm still doing just as much documentation because I'm constantly writing user stories. I'm constantly doing diagrams. I'm constantly, adding use cases to, user stories. So to me, I think saying less documentation, while it is less formal, it's not really less. So I think when people really understand what the Agile transition really is, then, and how to balance that, I think at that point, the team becomes much more effective, because if you have stories that are not complete and not fully articulated, you're going to have a crappy product, a crappy low quality product. And nobody wants that, because Agile does emphasize high quality. So understanding that balance is absolutely critical.
Thank you. Last question from Aurea. What's the best approach for a CPA making the transition to a BA?
So a CPA in term, like a accountant, is that the CPA you're referring to? An accountant? I think it depends. I wonder if you're going to have a domain, a specialized domain in maybe like accounting or anything like that. But I would just say learning as much as you can about what a BA actually does, and then first identifying as many transferable skills between accountant and BA as you can, and then really working off that, right? So for example, an accountant might do a lot of things with like analyzing spreadsheets or analyzing formulas, right? And BAs can do stuff like that too, right? So I would say starting there, but I think your next role is to really understand some of the core functions of the BA role, and then transitioning to understanding the overall SDLC process and the overall project management process, and then taking things from there.
Thank you, Dr. Michael.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome. And you're welcome to everyone who's saying thank you in the comments as well.
Yeah. All right. Once again, I will just say a big thank you to Dr. Michael for this wonderful session. It's really been informative, and we appreciate, your time. I appreciate everyone who was on here, taking out, the time from your day to attend this session. We look forward to having you in subsequent sessions. Again, just to reiterate, in line with what this, today's event was, it's to educate you more and to guide you in the steps towards being able to obtain some kind of certification as a business analyst and continue to strengthen, your competency in it. And IIBA does have 3 core certifications for beginners, if you're an intermediate level, and if you feel that you're professional enough, have enough years in the career, racked up those hours, then you can go forward for the CBAP. More specifically, is the AAC, which supports the Agile, and then there is the CPOA, which is upcoming, starting in June this year. And then the CCA for those of us who are more centralized in cybersecurity or working in the security department of an organization, or if you're interested in data analytics. So there is something for everyone in IIBA, depending on what domain you're focused in. And lastly, you know, I don't know if some of us got the emails from IIBA, but IIBA has kicked off the harmonization. So you don't have to pay a chapter membership anymore. In order for you to be a member of any chapter that you're close to geographically, you just have to be an IIBA member and then select that chapter in your profile, and that becomes your chapter. But you are by default going to be associated to the chapter that's geographically closest to you. So we look forward to those of you who are not IIBA members to become IIBA members. There is an immense benefits to being an IIBA member, from having access to knowing that there are going to be events like this, to seeing Dr. Michael White more, not just in South Florida events, but also in events that are hosted by other chapters. And of course, for the South Florida chapter, we're constantly looking for volunteers. We have committee positions that are open. You don't have to essentially even be a BA right now at the moment. If you have something that you enjoy doing, like creating marketing content, or you like to write, or you just want to, you know, volunteer and associate, you know, relate with more BAs in the community and give some time back to the industry, we look forward to you volunteering. Please email us at president@southflorida.iiba.org. And we have some upcoming events. Thank you again, Dr. Michael, for today's event. We currently have our BABOK study group going on, which actually is happening simultaneously to this event, today being a Tuesday, but we have that going on from today till I think sometime in July. We have Jennifer Bedell next in our next event for June 22nd, and Paula Bell for us in July. And of course, we have events lined up all the way till November. Please go on our website. We have these events on our website. You can register right now. Or if you're going on the IIBA website, we'll also have these events listed on the IIBA chapter events website page. Registration is free as always. Mark your calendars now, and I promise that these are going to be events that you definitely do not want to miss. And on this note, I will call an end to the event and ask that please follow us on our social media. We're on Twitter, we're on LinkedIn, IIBA South Florida chapter. There's a company, which is the page you should follow, but there's also a group, and we're trying to migrate people from the group to the company. But you will receive our most up-to-date information on the company if you follow the company page. Thank you very much all for your time. Thank you, Dr. Michael, and may we all have a wonderful, blessed night, and have a great week ahead.